Dr. Victor Hale stared at the mislabeled vials on the lab counter and made a choice that would destroy a family. He knew. He saw the error. Two embryo samples, two different donors scrambled by a night of careless logging and a signature he'd forged to cover a shortcut. He capped the vials, slid them into the storage rack, and walked out of the room without saying a word. That decision made in less than 30 seconds would not surface for another 9 months. Not until a delivery room fell completely silent. Not until a doctor's voice dropped low and careful, and a husband standing over his newborn son felt the floor disappear beneath him. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very last word. Drop a comment right now and tell us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Margaret Collins had been waiting for this moment for 6 years. 6 years of temperature charts and hormone injections, and driving to appointments before dawn because the clinic opened early and the waiting room was already full by 8. 6 years of watching other women push strollers through the grocery store while she stood in the cereal aisle trying to hold herself together. 6 years of phone calls that started with, "I'm so sorry, Margaret," and ended with her sitting on the bathroom floor back against the tub, Daniel's hand finding hers in the dark. 3 rounds of IVF. 3 times she had let herself believe. 3 times her body had said no. By the 4th round, she had stopped telling people. She stopped accepting the casseroles and the thinking of you cards and the well-meaning advice from women who had never gone through it. She and Daniel had made a quiet agreement they would do this last round in private, and whatever happened, they would face it together. When the call came back positive, she didn't scream. She didn't cry. She sat at the kitchen table and pressed both hands flat against the wood and breathed for a full minute before she called Daniel at work. "It worked," she said. There was a long pause. Then she heard him exhale a sound she had never heard from him before, something that had been locked inside him for years finally releasing. "Both of them?" he asked. "Both of them," she said. "Twins. 2 heartbeats confirmed at the 6-week scan. A boy and a girl according to the anatomy scan at 20 weeks, though Margaret had joked that she didn't care what they were as long as they were loud and hungry and completely unreasonable. Daniel had laughed so hard he cried, and that was the moment she let herself believe it was actually going to happen. The pregnancy was difficult. Margaret was 39, which meant extra monitoring, extra appointments, a specialist in addition to her regular OB. She had gestational hypertension in the 2nd trimester that required medication and weekly blood pressure checks. She swelled in ways that surprised her. She couldn't sleep past 4 in the morning because one baby or the other always seemed to be doing something aggressive to her ribs. But she never complained, not once, because every kick, every sleepless night, every uncomfortable hour in a waiting room chair was proof that they were there, that they were real. Daniel installed the car seats 3 weeks before her due date. He assembled the cribs on a Saturday while Margaret sat on the bedroom floor reading the instruction manual out loud, and they argued cheerfully about which direction the screws went, and at one point he dropped a bolt behind the dresser, and she laughed so hard she had a contraction that scared them both until it passed. He painted the nursery a pale sage green because she said it was calm, and he said it looked like a vegetable, and she told him she didn't care what he thought because she was the one who was currently the size of a sedan. They were happy, genuinely bone-deep happy, in a way that felt almost careful, like they were both afraid to look directly at it, afraid that too much attention might make it disappear. The morning Margaret went into labor, she woke Daniel at 3 in the morning by squeezing his arm without saying anything. He was awake instantly. Now, she said. He was already reaching for his phone, already moving. Mercy General's labor and delivery floor was quiet when they arrived. The nurses moved efficiently around Margaret, attaching monitors, checking her vitals, asking questions. She answered in the clipped, focused way of a woman who had been preparing for this for a long time. Daniel sat beside her, one hand holding hers, the other pressed against his knee to stop it from bouncing. Dr. Nathan Ellison arrived at 6:15, still in his street clothes under his coat. Coffee in hand, unhurried but present. He was the kind of doctor who didn't perform calm. He simply was calm, which Margaret had always found reassuring in a way she couldn't fully explain. He had been her OB for the last 2 years of this journey, and he knew her chart the way some doctors know a patient's file and others know the actual person. Ellison was the second kind. "How are we doing?" he asked, glancing at the monitors before looking at Margaret directly. "I want them out," she said flatly. He smiled. Fair enough. Let's talk about where we are. The labor was long. It was not the kind of long that could be managed with breathing techniques and a good playlist, although Margaret tried both. It was the grinding, exhausting, take everything you have kind of long, the kind that turned hours into something formless and relentless. Daniel never let go of her hand. He talked to her not in the nervous, rambling way of someone filling silence, but in the low and steady way of someone who understood that his voice was the only anchor she had left. You're doing it, he kept saying. Margaret, you're doing it. She didn't have the energy to respond, but she heard him every time. By mid-morning, the nurses were repositioning equipment and the energy in the room had shifted. Dr. Ellison returned scrubbed and ready, and he spoke to Margaret in that same unhurried tone he always used. We're close, he said. You've done the hard part. She wanted to tell him that the hard part had started 6 years ago, but she couldn't talk anymore. She was somewhere past language, somewhere entirely physical, her whole self focused on a single task. The first baby came at 11:47. A girl. She arrived screaming loud and furious, as if she had been waiting and was not pleased about how long it had taken. The nurse placed her on Margaret's chest, and Margaret made a sound that Daniel would never be able to describe to anyone who hadn't been in that room. He was crying before he knew he was crying. He pressed his forehead against Margaret's temple and just breathed. Hi, Margaret whispered. Hi, baby. Hi. The girl screamed again, indignant, alive. Daniel touched her cheek with one finger, terrified of how small she was, terrified of everything about this moment, terrified and more grateful than he had ever been in his life. She's got your temper, he managed. She's perfect, Margaret said. Her voice was wrecked. She didn't care. They had approximately 4 minutes of that before the team reminded them there was still a second baby. The boy arrived at 11:53. He did not come quietly either. He announced himself with the same force as his sister, which made the nurse laugh and Daniel cry harder, which he would later claim was not crying, but rather a significant allergic reaction, which Margaret would tell their children about every single year for the rest of their lives. Daniel held his son for the first time and could not speak. The boy was so small that Daniel's hands nearly enclosed him completely, and he stood there looking down at this person, this actual breathing, living person who had not existed in the world 6 minutes ago, and felt something rearrange inside his chest in a way that was permanent. Noah, he said quietly. They had agreed on the names months ago. Noah and Clara. Noah, Margaret repeated from the bed, her voice soft and completely undone. The room was full of quiet movement nurses completing routine assessments, a pediatric team checking both babies with the efficient thoroughness of professionals who did this every day. Doctor. Ellison stood nearby reviewing notes, speaking in low tones to the senior nurse on shift, a woman named Diane who had been in labor and delivery for 22 years and whose face Daniel had unconsciously memorized over the last several hours because she was the one whose expression told him in real time whether things were going normally. He wasn't watching Diane's face right now. He was watching his son breathe. So he didn't see the moment her expression changed. He didn't see the small frown that crossed Dr. Ellison's face when he reviewed a set of figures on the chart in his hand. He didn't notice the way Ellison moved to Diane's side and spoke something quietly, the way she leaned in to look at the same page, the way both of them went still, in the particular way that medical professionals go still when they are recalibrating. Margaret noticed. She had been through enough appointments, enough moments where a doctor's face shifted in a room that was supposed to be routine to recognize that stillness immediately. What is it? She asked. Ellison looked up. His expression was controlled, but Margaret had learned to read past controlled expressions years ago in waiting rooms and consultation offices when doctors were choosing their words carefully. I'd like to review a few of the blood work results before we move forward, he said. Is something wrong with one of them? Daniel asked, turning from Noah. His voice changed immediately, the softness gone, replaced by something sharper and more careful. Is it the boy? Is he okay? Both babies are presenting well, Dan said, and he said it in a way that was true but did not answer the actual question which Margaret registered immediately. Then what are you looking at? She pressed. Ellison set the chart down and faced them both. He did not rush what he said next, which meant it was the kind of thing that needed to be said carefully. Their blood types came back from the initial panel, he said. The results showed something that I want to go over with you. He paused. The two babies have different blood types. The room stayed exactly as it was. The monitors continued. The light didn't change. But something shifted in Margaret's chest like a gear catching wrong. Different blood types, she repeated. Is that dangerous? It's not a medical emergency, Ellison said. Both babies are fine, but I want to be direct with you because you deserve that. He looked at both of them. Different blood types in twins can occur, but it warrants further analysis. We're going to run a more complete panel. How different? Daniel asked. Ellison told him. There was a silence. Daniel looked at Margaret. Margaret looked at Ellison. What does that mean? Daniel asked. His voice was quieter now. Something in it had shifted. Not anger, not accusation, but the particular tone of a man who had asked a question and already sensed he wasn't going to like the answer. I want to wait for the full results before I say anything definitive, Ellison said. Doctor. Daniel's voice was steady, very steady, the kind of steady that takes effort. Tell me what you're thinking. Elvis Bush held his gaze for a moment. In some rare cases, he said, significant blood type discordance in twins can indicate that they do not share the same biological father. He said it the way a surgeon makes an incision cleanly because a clean cut heals better. I want to be clear that there are other explanations we need to rule out, but I would not be doing my job if I didn't tell you what this preliminary data suggests. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Daniel had ever heard. He was still holding Noah. He didn't move. He looked down at the baby in his hands, the small, perfect screaming child he had named 6 minutes ago, and his mind went completely blank. Margaret's voice came from somewhere far away. That's not possible, she said. Her voice was not loud. It was not hysterical. It was the voice of a woman who had spent 6 years fighting for something and was not going to let a single sentence take it apart without a fight. I haven't been with anyone else, she said. She looked at Daniel when she said it, directly at him. Daniel, I need you to hear me. I have not been with anyone else. He looked at her. His face did something complicated, a series of things happening at once that no single word could cover. He believed her. He had always believed her in the immediate reflex way that came from 12 years of marriage and knowing someone's face when they were telling the truth. He believed her. But the doctor had just said something that his brain couldn't file away. Something that sat in the center of the room like an object no one could move around. I know, he said, but his voice came out smaller than he intended. Margaret heard it. She heard exactly what that smaller voice meant, and something in her eyes went tight. Nathan, she said, using the doctor's first name for the first time in 2 years of appointments, tell me what could explain this, because I am telling you both right now I have not been with anyone else, and I need someone in this room to start looking for another answer. Ellison did not flinch. That is exactly what we're going to do, he said. The full panel will take some time. In the meantime, I'd like to speak with the lab directly. Why the lab? Daniel asked. The question came out before he'd thought it through. Ellison's expression shifted just slightly, just enough. Because, he said carefully, there are circumstances in fertility treatment where errors can occur at a procedural level. I'm not saying that's what happened here, but it is something we need to account for. The word errors hung in the air. Margaret stared at him. What kind of errors? Ellison picked up the chart again. Let me make some calls. I want to have more information before we talk further. He looked at them both, the careful look of a man who knew more than he was saying and was measuring precisely what needed to be said right now versus what needed to wait. What I can tell you is this: you have 2 healthy babies. Whatever else is happening, that is true, and nothing about these next few hours changes that. He left the room. The door closed with a soft, definitive click. Daniel was still standing by the warmer where Noah had been placed. His hands were at his sides now. He was looking at his son, the dark hair, the small fists, the furious, miraculous, impossible reality of him. Clara was in Margaret's arms, quiet now, making the small, searching sounds of a baby finding her way in a world that was suddenly too big and too cold and full of voices she didn't know yet. Daniel, Margaret said. He turned. She was looking at him with an expression he recognized, not a plea, not an apology, but the face she made when she needed him to be the man she had married and not the man a situation was trying to make him into. Come here, she said. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed, and she reached up and put her free hand against the side of his face, and for a moment they just stayed there, her with Clara, him with his hand over hers, both of them in the middle of a moment that had no name yet. "We did not come this far," she said quietly, "for one sentence to undo us." He closed his eyes. "I know," he said, and this time his voice was the right size. But the question was still in the room with them. It wasn't going anywhere. They both knew it. Down the hall, Dr. Nathan Ellison stood at the nurse's station with the preliminary blood work in one hand and his phone in the other, and he was dialing a number he hadn't expected to need today. The number for the medical director of Bright Path Fertility Clinic, which was where Daniel and Margaret Collins had undergone their 4th round of IVF, the round that had finally worked. The phone rang 3 times. On the 4th ring, someone picked up. "This is Dr. Ellison at Mercy General," he said. "I need to speak with someone about a patient procedure from approximately 40 weeks ago. I'm looking at some results that don't add up, and I think you need to know about them." A pause. "No, it can't wait until Monday. I need someone now." He listened. His face did not change, but his grip on the chart tightened. Because whoever had made a mistake, and he was increasingly certain someone had had no idea yet that the consequences had just been born 6 minutes apart in room 11 at Mercy General, and that a man named Daniel Collins was sitting on the edge of a hospital bed trying to hold his family together with both hands while the floor continued to shift beneath him. In room 11, Margaret looked down at Clara. The baby had stopped making sounds. She was simply looking up the way newborns sometimes do, unfocused, searching, taking in the edges of a world she would spend the rest of her life learning to navigate. "Hi," Margaret whispered again. "I've got you." She meant it for Clara. She also meant it for Daniel. She also meant it for herself, because someone in this story had made a choice, a small, careless, catastrophic choice, and its consequences had been sitting in a laboratory for 9 months waiting to arrive. And now they had. And whatever came next, Margaret Collins was not going to let it take from her the only thing she had ever wanted this badly. She had not survived 6 years and 3 rounds of failure, and 1 long, impossible year of pregnancy to be undone by a lab result. Whatever the truth was, she was going to find it, and then she was going to burn it down to the ground if that was what it took. The phone call lasted 11 minutes. Daniel knew because he watched the clock on the wall of room 11 the entire time Dr. Ellison was gone, the way a person watches something when their mind refuses to settle anywhere else. 11 minutes, the second hand moved with a steadiness that felt offensive given what was happening in this room, in this hospital, in this life that had been perfect for approximately 4 minutes before it started coming apart at the seams. Margaret had not spoken since Ellison left. She was holding Clara against her chest, her chin resting lightly on top of the baby's head, her eyes open and focused on the middle distance in the way Daniel recognized as her thinking face, not shut down, not frozen, but processing, calculating. Margaret had always been the one who in a crisis went inward first and then came out swinging. He had loved that about her for 12 years. Right now it scared him a little because he didn't know what she was calculating. Noah was in the bassinet beside the bed, wrapped tight asleep, with the absolute authority of a person who had just done something enormously difficult and was done with everyone for the moment. Daniel kept looking at him. He couldn't stop. He would look at Noah and then look away and then look back, and every time he did, the same question would surface. Not an accusation, not yet, just a question, the kind that sits in the base of the skull and pulses, and he would hate himself for thinking it and think it again anyway. He pulled his chair closer to the bed and sat down. "Talk to me," he said. Margaret looked at him. "About what?" "About anything, about what you're thinking." "You know what I'm thinking." "I know what I'm thinking," he said. "I don't want to assume they're the same thing." She exhaled slowly. "I'm thinking about the clinic," she said. "I'm thinking about that last cycle. About every appointment, every phone call, every time they handed me paperwork, and I signed it without reading all of it because I was so tired, Daniel. I was so tired by that point, I just wanted it to work." She stopped. "I'm thinking that if something went wrong in that lab, I need to know exactly what, and I need to know who knew, and I need to know when." Daniel looked at her steadily. "And us, are you thinking about us?" She met his eyes. "There is no version of this conversation where I stop being your wife," she said. "So yes, I'm thinking about us, but I'm not scared of us." He nodded slowly. He wanted to match her certainty. He was working on it. "I don't think you did anything," he said. I want you to know that. I know you don't think that, she said, but I also know that information like what Ellison just delivered doesn't just sit there quietly. It starts asking questions even when you don't want it to. She looked at him directly. I need you to ask me your questions, Daniel. Whatever they are, right now before he comes back, because I would rather answer them in this room than have them follow us home. He was quiet for a moment. There's nothing to ask, he said finally. There's nothing. She studied his face the way she always did when she was deciding whether to believe him, not from suspicion, but from the deep attentiveness of someone who had been married long enough to know the difference between a man who was telling the truth and a man who wanted to. Okay, she said, then we're okay. We're okay, he said. The door opened. Dr. Ellison came back without the chart this time, which Margaret noticed immediately. He had his hands in his coat pockets, and he moved to the chair on the other side of the bed rather than standing, which also registered. He sat down. That was the moment she understood that whatever he was about to say was going to take more than a minute. I spoke with the medical director at Brightpath, he said. Her name is Dr. Sandra Voss. She's pulling your file right now, and she's going to call me back within the hour. He looked at both of them. But she said something in that initial call that I think you need to hear. What did she say? Daniel asked. Ellison's jaw tightened briefly, which was the closest thing to an expression of emotion that Margaret had ever seen from him. She said they had an incident report filed approximately 11 months ago, he said, in the embryology lab, a labeling discrepancy during a high-volume processing week. Margaret's hands went still on Clara's back. Define discrepancy, she said. She was vague on the details until she pulls the file, but she did confirm that it was flagged internally. He paused. Flagged internally and not communicated to the patients involved. The temperature in the room didn't change, but it felt like it did. They knew, Daniel said. His voice was flat. I don't want to characterize it beyond what she told me, Ellison said carefully. What I can tell you is that this conversation is not over, and I think the next one you have is probably with a lawyer. Margaret didn't respond to that. She was somewhere else for a moment. She was in the clinic 11 months ago in a procedure room that smelled like antiseptic and careful optimism, lying on a table while a team of people she trusted worked with the most irreplaceable material she had ever produced and treated it like a transaction. She was signing forms. She was squeezing Daniel's hand. She was believing with everything she had that these people were careful, that this system worked, that after everything they had already lost, the universe was not going to let anything else go wrong. They had an incident report, she said. Yes, and they didn't call us. According to the initial conversation, no. They knew something had gone wrong in that lab, and they let me walk into that transfer, and they did not say a word. Ellison did not answer because she was not asking him. She was saying it out loud because saying it out loud was the only way to make it real, and she needed it to be real before she decided what to do next. Daniel stood up. He didn't go anywhere. He just stood because sitting suddenly felt impossible. My son, he said. The words came out stripped of everything except the core of what he was asking. Noah. What are you telling me about Noah? I'm telling you that we need the full genetic panel to know anything with certainty, Ellison said. What the preliminary blood work suggests is a possibility, not a conclusion. And regardless of what the genetics say about biological origin, Noah is your son. You were present for every step of this process. Whatever happened in that lab, it happened to your family, not to someone else's. That's not what I asked, Daniel said. I know, Ellison said. The silence stretched out. Clara made a small sound in Margaret's arms, and both of them looked at her immediately, that automatic reflexive attention that neither of them had had to learn, that had simply arrived with the babies fully formed. It was the same look, the same speed, the same instinct. Margaret saw Daniel do it, and something in her chest cracked open a little. Sit down, she told him. He sat. We're not deciding anything today except this, she said. She looked at Ellison. I want the full genetic panel. I want a copy of everything the clinic sends you. And I want Dr. Voss on the phone the moment she has that file. She looked at Daniel. And we are not going to let anyone in this hospital or anywhere else make us feel like our family is a question mark. Do you hear me? I hear you, Daniel said. Good. She looked down at Clara. Because she doesn't know any of this, and neither does he, and they don't need to. Ellison nodded and left again. For a long time after the door closed, neither of them spoke. Daniel reached into the bassinet and touched Noah's hand just with one finger, the way he had done in the first minutes after the birth, and Noah's fingers closed around it in that grip that newborns have, instinctive and total and entirely without agenda. Daniel looked at his son's face and waited for the question to surface again. It didn't. What surfaced instead was something he hadn't expected, something quiet and unambiguous, something that had nothing to do with blood type or genetic panels or a phone call from a fertility clinic that should have come 11 months ago. It was just recognition, the simple, unglamorous fact of knowing. This was his. He didn't say it out loud. Some things didn't need to be said to be true. It was 2 hours later when Dr. Voss called back. Margaret had asked a nurse to bring in a second phone and put it on speaker, and she held it between herself and Daniel on the bed while Ellison stood nearby. Both babies were in their bassinets asleep. The room was as quiet as it was going to get. Dr. Sandra Voss had a precise, measured voice, the voice of someone who had spent a career managing difficult information in difficult moments, and who was currently managing a situation that had become significantly more difficult than she prepared for that morning. "Mr. and Mrs. Collins," she began, "I want to start by saying that I am deeply sorry for this conversation and for the circumstances that have made it necessary." "Then let's get to the circumstances," Margaret said. She didn't say it unkindly. She said it the way she said everything right now, with precision. Voss was quiet for exactly 1 second. "During a processing window approximately 11 months ago, we had an incident in our embryology lab. A mislabeling error occurred during a period of high case volume. 2 samples were logged under incorrect patient identifiers." Another pause. "We identified the error during our internal audit," when Daniel said, "approximately 10 months ago." Daniel looked at Margaret. Margaret did not look back. She was listening too hard to look anywhere. "10 months ago," Daniel repeated. "Margaret was already pregnant." "Yes." "And you knew." A pause that lasted 2 seconds too long. "We identified a potential discrepancy. We convened an internal review committee. There was discussion about the appropriate course of action given the stage of the pregnancy, the complexity of the situation, and you made a committee," Daniel said. "We followed protocol." "Your protocol," Daniel said, and now his voice was doing something different, something that was no longer careful, was to sit on this information while my wife carried a pregnancy that involved a mistake you made and not say one word to us. He stopped. "Is that what you're telling me? We were advised by legal counsel. I don't care about your legal counsel." His voice was very quiet now, which was worse than loud. "I care that my wife went through 9 months of a high-risk twin pregnancy without the information she needed. I care that we came into this hospital today and a doctor we'd never discussed this with had to be the one to tell us what you already knew." He stopped again. "I care that you sat in a committee meeting and decided that covering your exposure was more important than telling 2 people what had happened to their embryos." Dr. Voss did not respond immediately. "I understand your anger," she finally said. "Good," Daniel said. "Then we understand each other." Margaret set the phone down on the blanket. She didn't hang up. She just set it down the way someone sets something down when they need both hands free, when they need a moment to contain something before it becomes larger than the room. "Mrs. Collins," Voss's voice came from the phone, tinny and small now, against the blanket. "I want you to know that we take full responsibility." "I'll call you back," Margaret said, and she reached over and ended the call. The room held the silence of it. Ellison, who had been standing by the wall with the neutrality of a man who knew this was not his conversation, said nothing. Daniel pressed both palms against his face for a moment. Margaret picked up Clara from the bassinet without saying anything. She held her daughter the way she had been holding her all morning, close, matter-of-fact, like something that had always been hers. She looked at the baby's face for a length time. "I want to know whose," she said finally. She wasn't looking at either of them when she said it. "I want the full panel. I want to know the genetic profile of both of them, and I want to know where the second donor sample came from. And I want to know if that person is in a database somewhere, and I want to know everything." She looked up. "Not because it changes anything, but because I am not going to spend the rest of my life with a blank space in the middle of my family's story. I need to know what happened to my children before they were born. Ellison nodded. We can initiate a full genetic workup. The results will take a few days. Then start today, she said. He left to arrange it. Daniel leaned his head back against the wall and stared at the ceiling. Margaret could see the tension in his jaw, the way he was holding himself together from the outside in. She knew that posture. She had seen it after the first failed cycle, and the second and the third. The posture of a man who had decided that holding it together was the job right now, and was going to do the job even if it cost him something. You don't have to be okay, she said. I know, he said without moving. I'm not asking you to be okay. He lowered his head and looked at her. What are you asking me? I'm asking you to stay in this room with me, she said. I'm asking you not to go somewhere inside your head where I can't reach you, because we've done that before, and it almost cost us everything, and I'm not doing it again. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he got up and sat on the edge of the bed, and she shifted Clara into the crook of one arm and put her other hand in his, and they stayed like that, not talking, not trying to solve it, just staying in the room the way she'd asked. Noah woke up and made a sound of profound dissatisfaction, and Daniel reached over without thinking and picked him up, and the baby immediately made a different sound, lower and more considering, as if reassessing his position. He's dramatic, Daniel said. He gets it from you, Margaret said. It wasn't funny, and they both knew it, and neither of them laughed. But something in the air released slightly, and that was enough. There were still results they didn't have. There was still a clinic whose lawyers were probably already making calls. There was still a question about Noah that lived in the space between what they knew and what they could prove, and it was not going away on its own. But Daniel was holding his son, and Margaret was holding her daughter. And in the end, that was the fact they kept returning to, not because it answered everything, but because it was the one thing in this room that was not in dispute. They had waited 6 years for this. Whatever it cost to protect it, they were going to pay it. Down the hall in a small office off the nurse's station, Dr. Ellison was on the phone with the genetics lab, and while he waited on hold, he was reading through the BrightPath clinic file that had just come through on the secure fax. He read slowly. His expression did not change. But on page 4 in the section marked Internal Incident Summary, there was a name, a technician's name, the name of the person who had been working the embryology lab on the night the mislabeling occurred. And next to the name in handwriting that was not in the official report but had been added in pencil, the kind of addition that happens when someone writes something down before they have decided whether to include it, were 2 words: he knew. Ellison set the page down flat on the desk. He picked up the phone again and dialed a different number this time. The name on page 4 was Victor Hale. Ellison stared at it for another moment, then set the fax down and asked the genetics lab to hold. He picked up the incident report again and read the penciled notation a second time slowly, the way you reread something when your brain is trying to tell you that it means more than it appears to. He knew. 2 words. No signature, no date, written in the margin beside Victor Hale's name in handwriting that did not match any of the typed signatures at the bottom of the official report, which meant someone had added it separately, privately. Someone who worked at BrightPath and had not wanted that information in the official record, but had also apparently not been able to leave it out entirely. That was the kind of contradiction that only happened when a person was trying to carry something they couldn't fully set down. Ellison got back on the line with the genetics lab, finished the orders for the Collins panel, and then sat in the office for a moment without moving. He was not a man who made decisions quickly, but he was also not a man who delayed once he'd made them. He picked up the report and walked back down the hall to room 11. Margaret was nursing Clara when he came in. She looked up immediately. She had the heightened alertness of a woman who had decided that no information was going to reach this room without her knowing about it first. Daniel was on his feet in 2 seconds. What did you find? I want to show you something, Ellison said. He set the fax on the bed beside Margaret and pointed to the name. Victor Hale. He's listed as the embryology technician on duty the night of the incident. Margaret looked at the name. Who is he? According to the staff directory I pulled, he worked at BrightPath for 3 years. He left the clinic 8 months ago. He paused. 2 months after the internal audit identified the mislabeling error. Daniel read that sequence twice. He left after the audit. Yes. Did they fire him? The file lists his departure as voluntary resignation. Ellison said the words carefully, the way a man says something he doesn't believe. But there's something else. He pointed to the penciled notation. That was added to this copy of the report by hand. It wasn't part of the original filing. Margaret looked at the two words. Her jaw tightened. He knew, she read aloud. Yes. Who wrote that? I don't know yet, Ellison said, but someone inside that clinic wanted those words attached to his name, even if they weren't willing to put it in the official record. A silence moved through the room. He made the mistake, Daniel said slowly, and they let him walk. That's one reading of it. What's the other reading? Ellison did not answer that, which was its own kind of answer. Margaret handed Clara to Daniel, and she did it the way she handled transitions, in a crisis smoothly, without ceremony, freeing up her hands because she needed to think without something precious in them. I want that man's full name, his last known address, and whoever wrote those two words on this page, she said. I want to know if he went to another clinic. I want to know if this has happened to anyone else. Margaret, Daniel started, if he made this mistake with our embryos, she said, he may have made it with someone else's. And if there are other families walking around with a blank space in the middle of their story that they don't even know about yet, then this isn't just our problem. She looked at Ellison. This is bigger than us. Ellison nodded once. I think you're right. Then I need a lawyer, she said. Today, not tomorrow. Today, while we're still in this hospital and everything is documented and fresh. She looked at Daniel. Do you still have Renata's number? Daniel blinked. Renata Marsh. She handles medical malpractice. She's good. Call her. He already had his phone out. Renata Marsh arrived at Mercy General at 4:17 that afternoon. She was 53, wore her hair short and silver, and carried a leather bag that had seen the inside of more hospital rooms than most doctors. She shook Margaret's hand first, then Daniel's, and pulled a chair to the foot of the bed and sat down with the focused attention of someone who had trained herself never to react visibly to anything in the first 5 minutes of a new case. She listened to everything. She asked 4 questions during the whole of it, each one precise. When they were done, she looked at the Bright Path facts for 60 seconds without speaking. Okay, she said finally. Here's where we are. She set the papers down. What you're describing is not a documentation error or an administrative oversight. What you're describing is a chain of custody failure in a medical procedure involving biological material that was entrusted to that clinic. They failed to maintain the integrity of that material. They identified the failure internally, and they made a deliberate decision not to inform you. That decision was made while Margaret was pregnant. Is that criminal? Daniel asked. It depends on a number of factors, and I want to be careful about what I say before we've had time to fully review the file. But civil exposure for that clinic is significant, potentially very significant. She looked at both of them. What I need from you right now is this. I need you not to communicate with Bright Path again without me on the call. Not a text, not an email, not a polite response to a voicemail. Nothing. Every word from this point forward goes through me. Dr. Voss said she was going to call back, Margaret said. She can call me, Renata said. She wrote her number on a card and set it on the bedside table. I also want the full name of the technician, whatever contact information Dr. Ellison can provide, and a copy of everything that's been faxed to this hospital from that clinic. Ellison provided it. Renata read through the additional pages efficiently, without expression. When she got to page 4 in the handwritten notation, she stopped. She read it twice. He knew she said the same way Margaret had said it, quiet and flat. Then she looked up. Do you know who wrote this? Not yet, Ellison said. Find them, she said, because if someone inside that clinic documented even informally that Victor Hale was aware of this error, and continued anyway, that changes the legal character of this significantly. She looked at Daniel and Margaret. That's the difference between a negligent mistake and a deliberate concealment. The room went quiet in a way that was different from the earlier silences. Those had been the silences of shock, of processing, of two people trying to absorb something enormous. This one was the silence of a case taking shape, of something that had been formless beginning to have edges. Daniel's phone buzzed. He looked at it, then looked at Margaret. It's my mother. Don't answer, she said. He put it face down. Margaret leaned back against the pillows, and for the first time since that morning, she looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with labor. She looked tired the way a person looks when they have been running on adrenaline and clarity for hours, and those things are starting to cost something. How are you doing? Renata asked, and she said it without any professional veneer, just one woman asking another. Margaret looked at Clara in Daniel's arms. I want to sleep, she said. I want to sleep and wake up in a house with my children and let someone else be angry for a little while. She paused. But I don't think that's available right now. It will be, Renata said. I'm going to make some calls. You don't need to do anything else today except be with your family. She stood, collected the papers, and looked at both of them with the steady regard of someone who had sat in a lot of rooms with a lot of people on the worst days of their lives. You're going to be all right. This is fixable. Not undone, I want to be honest with you about that. There are going to be questions you'll have to live with for a while. But what happened to you is not the end of anything. Do you understand? Margaret nodded. Daniel said yes. Renata left. The room was quiet for the first time all day in a way that felt bearable rather than loaded. Daniel set Clara in the bassinet gently, then sat back on the edge of the bed, and Margaret put her head against his shoulder, and he put his arm around her, and they just sat. She's good, Daniel said about Renata. I know, Margaret said. How did you know she did malpractice? I read her biography 2 years ago when I was trying to find someone to talk to about our second failed cycle and whether the clinic had followed proper protocol. She paused. I didn't end up calling her then because I couldn't prove anything. She looked at the bassinets. Now I can. Noah made a sound, not crying, just announcing his presence, which already seemed like a personality trait. Daniel reached over and rested his hand on the edge of the bassinet, and the baby went quiet again, as if that was all he had wanted. I need to ask you something, Daniel said. Margaret tensed almost imperceptibly. Okay. Not about any of that, he said quickly. I need you to tell me honestly how you are. Not the version where you're managing everything. The real version. She was quiet for a moment. I'm frightened, she said. Not of the legal part, not even of what the genetics come back showing. I'm frightened that at some point in the next few days or weeks, you're going to be alone with this, without me in the room, and the questions are going to get louder, and you're going to start doing math in your head, and I can't be there every second to... Stop, he said. Daniel, I need you to stop, he said gently, because I've been doing the math you're describing, and I want to tell you what I keep arriving at. He looked at Noah. Every answer I get is the same. I don't have a version of this family that doesn't have him in it. I don't know how to want that version. So the math isn't working against us. It's just math. Margaret looked at her husband for a long moment. 12 years, she said quietly. 12 years, he agreed. She closed her eyes and leaned back into him. She was asleep in 6 minutes. Daniel sat without moving so he wouldn't wake her. He was not asleep. He would not sleep for a long time. But he kept his arm around her and watched the bassinets and let the quiet of the room do what it could. It was 7:40 in the evening when Ellison came back. He knocked lightly, checked that Margaret was still resting, and moved to Daniel's side of the bed. I found him, he said quietly. Daniel straightened. Hale, not Hale, the person who wrote the note. He glanced at Margaret, made sure she was still asleep. Her name is Christine Yo. She was the senior embryologist at Brightpath. She and Hale worked together for 2.5 years before she resigned from the clinic 3 months after he did. She resigned too. Yes, and she reached out to the state medical board 6 weeks after her resignation. Filed a complaint, he paused. The complaint was reviewed and closed pending further investigation. It's been sitting there for 5 months. Daniel stared at him. She tried to report it. She filed something. Whether it went anywhere is a different question. Ellison set a piece of paper on the bedside table, a printout with a phone number on it. She's not hard to find. She's working at a different clinic in the city. I don't know if she'll talk, but I think she's been waiting for someone to ask the right question. Daniel looked at the number. Does Renata know about this? I called her office before I came back in here. I left the details with her assistant. Good. Daniel looked at the paper for another moment. What was Victor Hale doing in that lab after hours? Ellison paused. I'm sorry, Mom. The incident report, Daniel said. The mislabeling happened during a high-volume processing week. But was Hale scheduled for that shift? Was he logged in officially? Ellison's expression shifted slightly. I didn't look at that detail specifically. I'd like to know, Daniel said, because there's a difference between someone making a careless mistake under pressure and someone being in that lab when they weren't supposed to be. And I want to know which one this was. Ellison looked at him for a moment. I'll request the full shift logs from that period. Thank you. Margaret's voice came from behind them, quiet but awake. He wasn't scheduled. They both turned. She was looking at the ceiling, not at them, but she was alert. She had been alert for a while, Daniel realized. She had been listening. How do you know? Daniel asked. I don't know, she said. But the way Ellison just reacted when you asked the question, he doesn't know either, which means no one checked. Which means nobody asked whether Hale was supposed to be in that lab or whether he let himself in for some other reason. She sat up slowly. If he was off schedule, then this isn't carelessness. This is something else entirely. The room held that for a moment. Something else like what? Daniel asked. Margaret looked at him. I don't know yet, but I think Christine Yo does. She looked at the phone number on the bedside table. Call Renata, tonight. Tell her we need to know why Victor Hale was in that lab. Ellison left them to it. Daniel picked up his phone and dialed Renata's cell. She answered on the second ring, which told him she had been expecting the call. Renata, he said, we need to talk about the shift logs. She was quiet for exactly 1 second. I just got off the phone with my assistant, she said, about Christine Yo. Then you know? I know enough to tell you that I've been in this business for 27 years, and I have never had a case where every new piece of information made the original picture worse. She said, I'm going to need those shift logs by morning, and I'm going to need to speak with Yo myself. Another pause. Daniel, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Okay. Is there any possibility, any at all, that someone outside your household had access to your donor sample file? Any conversation with someone at the clinic, any interaction where your case details might have been shared with a third party? Daniel frowned. No, why? Renata's answer was careful and precise. Because Christine Yo's complaint to the medical board didn't just reference a labeling error, she said. It referenced what she described as a pattern of irregular access to donor files in the months preceding the incident. She alleged that someone was pulling patient files outside of case assignments. No reason logged. No supervisor authorization. A pause. She named Victor Hale. Daniel sat very still. He was accessing patient files outside his assignments, Daniel said. According to her complaint, yes. Why? Why would an embryology technician need to pull patient files he wasn't assigned to? That, Renata said, is exactly the question. Her voice was measured, but underneath it was something that Daniel recognized, the contained energy of a lawyer who had just found the thread that was going to unravel everything. I'll have more tomorrow. Try to get some rest. She hung up. Daniel set the phone down. Margaret was watching him from the bed. She had both babies in with her, now one on each side, the logistics of which required considerable pillow architecture, but she had arranged it with the same practical efficiency she brought to everything. She looked like someone who had decided that however many pieces this day was breaking into, she was going to be the surface they landed on. Tell me, she said. He told her. When he finished, the room was so quiet he could hear the monitors on the babies, their small breathing steady and absolute. He was pulling files he had no business pulling, she said. Yes. Files that included donor information, patient information, details about people's embryos and their transfer schedules and their entire reproductive case histories. That's what Renata is saying. Margaret looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Then this wasn't an accident, she said. Daniel didn't answer because she wasn't asking. She was arriving somewhere and he was watching her get there. Someone had access to who we were, she said slowly, what our case looked like, what donor material we were using. And then something happened in that lab on a night that may not have been a normal shift. She looked at him. Daniel, if this was deliberate, we don't know that yet. If it was deliberate, she repeated, not arguing with him, just holding the shape of it, then there is someone out there who has a biological connection to Noah, and that someone may not be a random anonymous donor. She stopped. That person may know exactly who we are. The silence that followed was the longest of the day. Clara made a sound in her sleep, a small sigh. the effortless exhalation of someone who trusted completely that the world would hold her while she rested. Daniel looked at Noah. Noah was awake the way he had been intermittently all day, eyes open, unfocused, taking in whatever the world was offering, without having the language yet to ask what any of it meant. "I'm going to find out who you are," Daniel said to him quietly, the way you say something when you mean it as a promise and not a threat. "All of it, every piece." He reached in and touched the baby's hand. "And then I'm going to make sure nobody ever gets to use it against us." Noah's fingers closed around his. Down the hall on the fourth floor of Mercy General, a man Daniel Collins had never met was sitting in a parking structure 2 blocks away, looking at his phone. He had a Google alert set for Bright Path Fertility Clinic. He had had it for 8 months. The alert that had come through 20 minutes ago referenced a legal inquiry linked to the clinic's records. He read it twice. Then he started his car. The man's name was Ryan Calder. He was 36 years old, worked in commercial real estate, and had donated genetic material to Bright Path Fertility Clinic 22 months ago as part of their anonymous donor program. He had done it once, filled out the forms, passed the screenings, and walked out of that clinic telling himself it was a neutral act, a clinical transaction between himself and a process that had nothing to do with his actual life. He had believed that right up until 8 months ago, when a woman he had dated briefly 3 years earlier, a nurse who had since moved to a different hospital, had texted him out of nowhere and said she needed to tell him something about the clinic where she used to work, about a technician, about a mistake that may or may not have been a mistake. She had said enough to make him set up the alert, not enough to make him do anything with it. He had spent 8 months doing nothing with it because doing something meant making it real, and Ryan Calder had a very specific and well-practiced relationship with things he didn't want to make real. But the alert was real. The legal inquiry was real. And whatever was happening inside Mercy General 2 blocks away was real and getting more real by the hour. And he could feel it the way you feel weather before it arrives. A pressure change, an inevitability, a sense that the window for choosing your posture had almost closed. He sat in his car for 14 minutes. Then he drove home without going inside the hospital because he still didn't know what he would say if he did. Inside room 11, Margaret was not sleeping. It was past 10 o'clock. Both babies were in their bassinets. Daniel had finally gone under, sitting up in the recliner with his head tipped back, his mouth slightly open, the sleep of a man who had been awake for 19 hours and whose body had simply stopped negotiating. Margaret had watched him go with a feeling that was mostly tenderness and partly the specific loneliness of being the only one still awake in a room full of people you love. She had her phone in her lap. She had been looking at it for 20 minutes without opening anything on it. Finally, she opened the browser and searched Victor Hale, embryologist. The first result was a LinkedIn profile, now deactivated, that still appeared in cached form. She read it quickly. Bright Path Fertility Clinic, 3 years. Before that, a smaller private clinic in Pennsylvania. Before that, a 2-year gap with no employer listed. She noted that gap the way she noted everything tonight, filed, underlined, waiting. The second result was a comment thread on a fertility forum from 14 months ago. A user with a generic username asking whether anyone had had concerns about the handling of their samples at BrightPath. 3 responses, all vague, all the careful language of people who were frightened of being wrong in public. Nothing specific, nothing actionable. The third result made her stop. It was a legal filing notice from the county court database. A civil action initiated 7 months ago by a couple names redacted in the public filing against Bright Path Fertility Clinic. The claim referenced embryological mishandling and emotional damages. It had been filed and then, according to the docket, settled confidentially 4 months ago. They had settled with someone else, quietly, before Margaret had ever delivered her children. She stared at the screen. They had done this before. Not the same mistake, or maybe the same mistake she didn't know, but they had been to court over something like this, paid someone to be quiet about it, and kept operating, kept taking new patients, kept filing new incident reports that went nowhere, and commissioning internal audits that protected no one, and letting technicians with irregular access patterns resign voluntarily and move on. She picked up the phone and dialed Renata's cell. It was 10:15. She didn't care. Renata answered on the third ring. "Margaret? There's a sealed settlement," Margaret said. "Civil action against Bright Path 7 months ago. I found the filing in the county database." A short pause. "I know about it." You know, I found it 2 hours ago. I was going to bring it to you in the morning. Tell me now. Renata's voice shifted into the register she used when she was moving fast through information. The couple filed the claim 8 months ago, approximately 1 month after the internal audit at BrightPath. Their case referenced a different cycle, a different procedure date, but the same lab window. Same technician on record. She paused. They settled for an amount I can't confirm because the terms are sealed, but based on the speed of the settlement, it was significant. And as part of the settlement, they couldn't talk about it, Margaret said. Standard NDA. Yes. So BrightPath paid them, silenced them, and kept Victor Hale's name out of public record. Yes, Margaret was quiet for a moment. Renata, how many other couples are there? The pause this time was different. I don't know yet, but I think that's the right question. And I think the answer is more than two. The words landed in Margaret's chest like something physical. More than two. I want to go public, Margaret said. Margaret, not tonight, not this week. I understand we need to build the case first, but I want you to hear me say it right now so that when the time comes, there's no confusion about what I want. Her voice was level, not emotional, or rather the emotion was fully present, but was not driving. It was fuel, not steering. I'm not signing an NDA. I'm not taking a settlement that requires me to disappear. If there are other families like us, if there are other children out there whose parents don't know their story has a blank page in the middle, I am not going to be one more person who knew about Victor Hale and said nothing. I hear you, Renata said. Good. Get some sleep, Renata said not unkindly. You delivered twins today. I'm aware, Margaret said, and she hung up. She set the phone face down on the blanket and looked at the bassinets for a long time. Clara was on her back arms up the full physical abandon of a newborn who had not yet learned to guard herself against anything. Noah was on his side, one fist curled under his chin, a posture that was somehow already entirely his own. Considered self-contained, a little private. I don't know who you look like yet, she said to him barely above a whisper, but that's okay. You don't have to look like anyone. You just have to be you. She leaned her head back and closed her eyes. She didn't sleep, but she rested, which was the closest thing available. Daniel woke at 6:15 to find Margaret sitting up in bed with both babies awake and a coffee she had somehow acquired from the nurse's station. She handed him a cup when he opened his eyes and said without preamble, Renata found a sealed settlement. BrightPath has done this before. He took the coffee. He processed what she had said. He nodded slowly the way a man nods when he has slept 5 hours and the information is large, but his body is committed to staying calm. How many others? He asked. We don't know yet. Okay. He drank the coffee. What do we do today? Renata is coming at 9. Christine Yo agreed to speak with her at 11. She looked at him. And the genetics lab said preliminary results from the full panel may come back as early as this afternoon. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Are you ready for that? No, she said honestly. Are you tired? No. He looked at Noah. But I'm not scared of it the way I was yesterday. Why not? He thought about it. Because whatever that panel says, it's just information. It doesn't change the part I was actually worried about. What part is that? He looked at her. Whether I was going to be enough for this, whether I was going to be the kind of man who could look at his son and not let doubt make him smaller. He set the coffee down. I've been looking at him for 18 hours, Margaret. The doubt's not winning. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up his hand and pressed it briefly once the compressed language of two people who didn't need more words than that. Renata arrived at 9:02, moving with the focused efficiency of someone who had been working this case since before the sun came up. She set her bag on the chair, pulled out 3 printed documents, and handed one to each of them. This is what I have so far, she said. I'm going to walk you through it. The first document was a timeline. Renata had reconstructed from the incident report, the court filing, and Christine Yo's medical board complaint, a sequence of events inside BrightPath's embryology lab stretching back 26 months. It was precise and terrible. Victor Hale had been accessing patient files outside his case assignments for at least 14 of those months. The irregular access had been flagged internally, once informally, by Christine Yo, who had brought it to her direct supervisor 9 months before the incident. Her supervisor had told her to document it and move on. The documentation had not made it into any official record. Then came the incident with Margaret and Daniel's cycle, the mislabeling, the audit, Hale's resignation, Yeo's resignation, the other couple's lawsuit, the settlement, the sealed agreement, the complaint to the medical board that had been sitting in a review queue for 5 months going nowhere. 26 months, Daniel said when Renata had walked them through it. He was doing this for 26 months. Based on what I can establish from the accessible records, yes. And nobody stopped him. Nobody stopped him, Renata said. There was no editorializing in her voice. She let the fact be what it was. Why, Margaret asked, why was he accessing those files? He was an embryology tech. He processed samples. He didn't need patient history to do that job. No, Renata said. He didn't. She picked up the second document and set it between them. This is where I need to be careful because what I'm about to tell you is based on preliminary information, and I want you to understand it's not confirmed. She looked at both of them. Christine Yeo told me something this morning before our formal interview this afternoon. She said that approximately 18 months ago, she began to notice a pattern. Certain donor profiles, specifically high-demand profiles that had been requested by multiple patients, were being accessed by Hale at a rate that didn't match his assigned caseload. High-demand profiles, Daniel said slowly. Certain genetic profiles are requested more frequently. Higher education, specific physical characteristics, health histories. These profiles attract more matches with potential recipients. She paused. Yeo believed, and she is careful to say believed, not confirmed, that Hale was using access to those profiles for a purpose beyond his job function. She didn't know what that purpose was, but she flagged the pattern. And no one listened, Margaret said. No one acted, Renata corrected with precision. Someone listened. The supervisor she reported to knew. The question of what he did with it is something I intend to answer. Margaret set the paper down. Renata, plain language. What are you telling us? Renata looked at her directly. I'm telling you that Victor Hale may have had a reason for being in that lab that had nothing to do with his job. And if that's true, then what happened to your embryos may not have been a mistake in the conventional sense. She let that settle. I want more before I say what I think that means. But you asked me to be direct with you, and that's where I am. The room held that for a full 10 seconds. He did it on purpose, Daniel said. The words came out flat and certain, not a question. I'm not saying that yet, but you're close to saying it. Renata looked at him steadily. I'm saying that the picture I'm building does not look like negligence. It looks like something more deliberate, and I want to know what the engine of it was. She picked up her bag. I have the interview with Yeo at 11. I'll call you when it's done. She left. Daniel and Margaret looked at each other. If he did it on purpose, Margaret said carefully, then someone chose Noah. Someone specifically chose whose genetic material went into our transfer. Why, Daniel said, not how. Why? That's what I want to know. She looked at her son. Because if someone chose him, if it was deliberate, then that person had a reason. And reasons have origins. And I want to find where this started. She picked up her phone and opened the county court database again. She had bookmarked the sealed filing the night before. She read through it once more, slower this time, looking for anything she had missed. She found it in the 4th paragraph of the original claim. A name. Not the plaintiff's names, which were redacted, not the clinic's, which was fully identified, but the name of a secondary respondent listed in the original filing and apparently not removed before the document was partially sealed. A name that had been included in the civil action before the settlement had presumably made its continued appearance unnecessary. Victor Allen Hale. He had been named personally, not just as an employee, as an individual respondent. And beneath his name in the address field that the original filing had required before the court's partial sealing an address in the city, current as of 7 months ago. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she texted Renata the address. Renata's reply came in 40 seconds. Where did you get this? Court filing, original claim before the sealing. His name is still in it. 3 dots. Then, do not contact him. I mean it. Margaret typed back, I know. She set the phone down. She was not going to contact him. She was not going to do anything rash or premature or counterproductive to the case Renata was building. She understood the value of process and documentation and doing this the right way. But she now knew where Victor Hale lived, and that knowledge settled into her like ballast, not a weapon, yet just weight. Stability. The feeling of a person who has been moved around by forces outside her control for 24 hours and has just found something solid to stand on. The genetics results came in at 2:40 that afternoon. Dr. Ellison came in personally, which told them everything about the weight of what he was carrying before he opened his mouth. He sat down in the chair by the bed and held the report without opening it, and he looked at both of them with the expression of a man who has been in medicine for 20 years and has not entirely made peace with this part of it. "Before I read these," he said, "I want to say something. Both of these children are healthy, completely healthy. Everything about their development is normal, and everything about their future is wide open. I need you to hold on to that while you hear the rest." "Read it," Daniel said. Ellison opened the report. Clara's genetics, as expected, confirmed both Daniel and Margaret as biological parents. Her profile was consistent and complete. Ellison explained it briefly and Margaret nodded. Then he turned the page. "Noah's panel," he said, "confirms Margaret as his biological mother." He paused. "It does not confirm Daniel as his biological father." The words went into the room the way a stone goes into water, entering a surface that then moved in all directions away from the point of impact. Daniel did not move. His face did not collapse. He sat in his chair and took one slow breath and kept his eyes on Ellison. "The profile," Ellison continued, "was run against the National Donor Registry with Margaret's consent. There was a match." He looked up. "The biological father is a registered donor. His genetic profile is in the system." "Does the system have his identity?" Daniel asked. "Registered donors are anonymous by default," Ellison said. "However, and this is where it becomes more complex given the legal proceedings your attorney has initiated, there is a pathway through the courts to request disclosure of donor identity in cases involving medical misconduct." "Renata already knows," Margaret said. "Yes, I spoke with her an hour ago." Daniel stood up and walked to the bassinet. He looked at Noah for a long time without speaking. The baby was awake, doing what he seemed to do often, looking back, not at anything specific, just outward with the patient attentiveness of someone taking in the terms of a world they had just arrived in. "He's mine," Daniel said quietly. He was not asking. He was not performing it for anyone in the room. He was saying it the way you say a true thing because it needed to be in the air. "Yes," Margaret said. He turned around. His eyes were dry. His face was the face of a man who had arrived somewhere hard and found it survivable. "What do we do next?" he asked Ellison. "Your attorney is pursuing the donor identity through the legal channel. In the meantime, I'd recommend both babies be seen by the pediatrician on staff for their standard newborn evaluation." "That hasn't changed. Their care plan hasn't changed." He looked at both of them. "As for the rest, that's in Renata's hands now." Ellison left. Margaret held her arms out, and Daniel crossed the room and sat next to her on the bed, and she leaned against him, and they both looked at the bassinets. "I want to find him," Daniel said. "The donor. I want to know if he knows. Renata will get his name. And if he had something to do with this, if Hale was connected to him somehow, if this wasn't random, then we'll know," Margaret said. "And we'll deal with it with Renata at the table and documentation in hand and everything done in the light." She looked at him. "We don't go around it. We go through it." His phone buzzed. He looked at it, an unknown number. He almost rejected it, then remembered what Renata had said about Brightpath trying to make contact, and answered it in case it was something she needed to know about. "Hello?" A pause, a male voice careful and uncertain. "Is this Daniel Collins?" "Who is this?" Another pause, longer, the pause of a man who had been sitting in a parking structure the night before for 14 minutes deciding whether to do this. "My name is Ryan Calder," the voice said. I think we need to talk. I think I know something about what happened to your family." His voice was unsteady but not evasive. It was the voice of someone who had been carrying something heavy for 8 months and had finally decided he couldn't keep carrying it alone. "I'm not the person who made the mistake, but I know who did, and I think I know why." Daniel looked at Margaret. She had heard it. She was already reaching for her phone to call Renata. "Where are you?" Daniel asked. "I'm in the lobby of your hospital," Ryan Calder said. "I've been sitting here for 2 hours. I wasn't sure I was going to come up." breath. I think, I think one of the babies might be mine, biologically, and I think Victor Hale made sure of it on purpose. His voice cracked slightly on the last word, not from grief exactly, but from the specific fracture that happens when a person has been holding a truth in silence for so long that saying it out loud breaks something irreversible open. I'm so sorry. I should have said something sooner. I didn't know what to do. Daniel held the phone against his ear. His hand was steady. Come up, he said. Room 11, fourth floor. He paused. And don't go anywhere before you get here. We have a lot of questions. He ended the call. Margaret had Renata on the line before he'd lowered the phone. Renata, she said, he's here. Ryan Calder was not what either of them had pictured. Margaret had pictured someone who looked guilty, someone who carried it visibly the way people do in movies when they arrive with a confession hunched, avoiding eye contact rehearsed. Ryan Calder walked into room 11, looking like a man who had made a decision and was now committed to surviving it. He was tall, dark-haired, and he stood in the doorway for exactly 2 seconds before he met Daniel's eyes and didn't look away. That more than anything was what Margaret noted first. He didn't look away. Daniel stood near the window. He had positioned himself there, deliberately not blocking the room, not aggressive, but occupying the space of a man who had decided how this meeting was going to go before it started. He looked at Ryan Calder the way you look at someone who has arrived at the center of the hardest day of your life, carrying information you are not sure you want and cannot afford not to have. Sit down, Daniel said. Ryan sat in the chair by the door. He held his jacket in his lap. His hands were still. Renata is on her way up, Margaret said. She's our attorney. She's going to hear everything you say. I know, Ryan said. That's fine. That's better. I should have talked to someone months ago. He exhaled slowly. I should have done a lot of things months ago. Tell us what you know, Daniel said. From the beginning, don't summarize, don't edit, just tell us. Ryan looked at him for a moment, then he nodded. I donated to BrightPath 22 months ago, he said. Standard anonymous program. I went through the screening, filled out the profile, and that was supposed to be the end of it. He paused. About 6 months after I donated, I got a message through a personal email. Not the clinic system, my actual email. The address I had never given BrightPath. He stopped to let that land. The message was from Victor Hale. Margaret went completely still. He contacted you, Daniel said. He said he worked at the clinic. He said he had processed my sample. And he said, Ryan stopped, pressed his lips together, started again. He said he had a business proposition. His words, a business proposition. He looked at the floor for a moment, then back up. He told me that my genetic profile was one of the highest demand profiles in BrightPath's donor registry, that I had characteristics that multiple patients had specifically requested. And he told me that if I was interested, he could ensure that my profile was matched with patients who would otherwise be placed with a different donor. More matches, more outcomes. He paused. He said he could do it without anyone knowing. Without the patients knowing, without the clinic knowing, just a redirect in the system. He was selling it, Margaret said. The words came out quiet and precise. He was selling your profile, guaranteeing matches to patients who hadn't been assigned you. That's what he was describing, yes. And what did you say? Daniel asked. Ryan looked at him directly. I said no immediately. I told him it was illegal, it was unethical, and if he contacted me again, I would report him to the clinic. He paused. He didn't contact me again. I thought it was over. His voice tightened. Then a friend of mine, the nurse I mentioned, someone I dated briefly, she reached out 8 months ago. She told me she'd heard something through hospital channels about an incident at BrightPath, a mislabeling, a family whose embryo transfer had produced results that didn't add up genetically. He looked at Margaret and Daniel in turn. She didn't have your names, but she knew enough of the details that I understood what might have happened. The room held that. You understood, Daniel said slowly, that even though you told him no, even though you refused, he may have done it anyway. Yes. And you didn't come forward. No. Ryan didn't dress it up. He didn't reach for an excuse. He just said the word and let it be what it was. I was afraid, not of you, of what it would mean legally, personally, the exposure of having my name connected to something like this, even as a victim of it. I kept telling myself the alert would tell me if it went further, that if it became a legal matter, I would say something. His jaw tightened. That was a cowardice I'm going to have to live with. The door opened and Renata walked in. She took in the room in about 3 seconds. Ryan in the chair, Daniel by the window, Margaret on the bed, the specific quality of the silence, and she pulled out her recorder and set it on the table without asking permission. "Mr. Calder," she said, "I'm Renata Marsh. I represent the Collins family. I need to record this conversation. Do you consent?" "Yes," he said. "Good." She sat down. "Start from the beginning and don't leave anything out." Ryan went through it again in more detail this time. Renata asked questions that were short and surgical and never overlapping. She let him finish each answer before she moved to the next. She did not react to anything visibly, which Margaret had come to understand was not coldness, but the professional discipline of someone who needed all the information before she started connecting it. When Ryan described Hale's email, the business proposition, the language about guaranteed matches the use of Ryan's personal email address, Renata looked up from her notes. "He used your personal email," she said. "Yes." "Did you save the message?" Ryan reached into his jacket pocket and produced his phone. "I screenshotted it and stored it in a secure folder the day I received it. I've never deleted it." Renata held his gaze for a long moment. "Mr. Calder, that screenshot is potentially the most important piece of evidence in this case." She kept her voice level. "I need you to understand that what you've just described is not just a civil matter for this clinic. What you're describing is a deliberate, premeditated scheme by a clinic employee and to profit from unauthorized manipulation of patient genetic material. That is a criminal matter." Ryan absorbed that without flinching. "I know." "Were there others?" Renata asked. "Did he approach anyone else that you know of?" "I don't know for certain, but in the message, the way he phrased it, it wasn't tentative. It wasn't the language of someone trying this for the first time." Ryan paused. It read like a pitch he'd given before. Daniel's hand resting on the windowsill curled once and then flattened. Renata looked at Margaret. "This is the engine," she said. "This is what Christine Yo saw in those access patterns. He wasn't just pulling files out of curiosity. He was building a client list. He was identifying high-demand profiles and going to the donors directly offering to guarantee placements for money presumably, or some other form of consideration we haven't established yet." She looked at Ryan. "Did he name a price?" "The message said terms would be discussed if I was interested. I didn't ask." "Of course." She made a note. "When you refused him, he still had your sample in the system, and he had access to patient files. He knew who had requested your profile, and he proceeded without your consent." "That's what I believe happened," Ryan said. Renata set her pen down. She rarely set her pen down. When she did, it meant she was about to say something that required full attention on both sides. "Let me be very direct about the current state of this. Victor Hale used his access as a clinic employee to contact a registered donor without authorization. He proposed a scheme that would amount to fraud against patients. The donor refused. Hale then proceeded unilaterally manipulating at least one embryo transfer cycle for reasons that were almost certainly financial, without the knowledge or consent of the donor, the patients, or the clinic. He then resigned when an internal audit threatened to surface the error, and BrightPath buried the incident under a civil settlement that protected their reputation and allowed him to walk." She looked at all three of them. "What I am going to do with the screenshot, the shift logs, Christine Yo's testimony, the sealed settlement, and the medical board complaint that has been sitting in a queue for 5 months is build something that doesn't go quietly. This is not going to another sealed settlement. This is going to a prosecutor." The word prosecutor went through the room differently than any word that had come before it. Ryan looked at his hands. Margaret looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at Renata. "How long does something like that take?" "Longer than any of us would like," she said honestly. "Months, possibly more than a year before criminal charges are filed, if they're filed. The civil case runs parallel and moves faster. But I want you to understand that the legal process is only one part of what's going to happen here." She looked at both of them. "What you decide to do publicly, when, how, and whether to put your names and your children's story in front of the world, that is your choice to make on your own timeline. No one can take that from you, and no one gets to rush you." "We're not being rushed," Margaret said. "Good." Ryan cleared his throat. The sound was careful, the sound of a person who has something else to say and is measuring the moment. I need to ask you something, he said. He was looking at Margaret. And I need you to know that whatever your answer is, whatever you decide, I will respect it completely, and I will follow your lead. He paused. The baby, Noah. He said the name carefully, like he had looked it up and was handling it with appropriate weight. I don't know what role, if any, you would ever want me to have. I'm not here to claim anything. I don't have any right to claim anything. He stopped. I want you to know that I'm not going to disappear again. Whatever you need from me, medically, legally, or anything else, I'm here. I should have been here 8 months ago, and I wasn't, and I can't undo that. But I'm here now. The room was very quiet. Margaret looked at him for a long moment. The look was not warm, and it was not cold. It was the look of a woman who had spent the last 24 hours making precise and consequential decisions and was not done making them. I appreciate you coming in, she said. I appreciate you saying that. She paused. But I need you to understand something. Noah has a father. He's standing by that window. He has been Noah's father since before Noah was born, and he will be his father every day of that child's life, regardless of what any panel or filing or court document says. She kept her eyes on Ryan. What you and I share is a medical fact. It is not a relationship until Noah is old enough to decide if he wants one. And if that day comes, I will handle it with everything I have to give him the most honest, most careful answer I can. She stopped. But that day is not today. Today he is 4 hours old. Today he is a baby in a bassinet who needs feeding and warmth and people who love him completely and without condition. That is what I'm focused on. Ryan nodded. Something in his face shifted, not relief exactly, but a release. The specific letting go of a man who has been carrying a weight so long, he had started to think it was part of him. Understood, he said. Thank you. I need your screenshot, Renata said, redirecting with the precision of someone who knew when a human moment had completed. Tonight, if possible. I'll send it to you now, Ryan said. He did. Renata's phone buzzed. She looked at the image, and for the first time in the entire meeting, her expression changed just briefly, just at the edges, with the controlled satisfaction of someone who has just found the keystone of an arch that is going to hold everything else up. Thank you, she said. I'll be in touch within 24 hours. In the meantime, please do not discuss this with anyone. Not family, not friends, not anyone who asks. She handed him her card. Everything goes through me. Ryan left 15 minutes later. The room felt different after the door closed, not emptier, but more settled, the way a room feels when the last unpredictable element has resolved into something known. Daniel came away from the window and sat on the edge of the bed. You okay? Margaret asked. Ask me in a week, he said. Fair enough. She reached for his hand. I meant what I said. To him. I know. I need you to actually know it, not just hear it. He looked at her. I know it, Margaret. I knew it in the first 5 minutes after they were born, before any of this started. There's no competition here. There's no question I'm losing sleep over. He looked at Noah in the bassinet. I'm losing sleep because we're in a hospital and those chairs are genuinely terrible. That's it. She laughed. It was short and a little wrecked around the edges, but it was a real laugh, the first one since the day before, and it broke something loose in both of them. Clara, apparently stirred by the sound, made a small and indignant noise. That is your mother's daughter right there, Daniel said. She has your ears, Margaret said. She has your attitude. She has your stubbornness. That is genetically impossible. She's 12 hours old. 12 hours with your DNA, Margaret said. Plenty of time. They stayed like that for a while, talking about nothing, talking about the babies, letting the conversation be small and ordinary in theirs. Outside the window, the city was moving through the last hour of a day that had started with twins and ended with a criminal scheme and a stranger in a doorway in a screenshot that was going to bring down a clinic. Outside, people were driving home, making dinner, living in the ordinary margins of their lives without knowing that in room 11 on the 4th floor, a family that almost was sitting together in the particular piece of people who have been through the worst of something and come out the other side still holding each other. Renata called at 9 that evening. I've spoken with the DA's office, she said without introduction. Informally, based on the screenshot and the pattern of behavior we can document, they're interested, seriously interested. She paused. I also heard from Christine Yo's attorney. She's prepared to testify. And the couple from the sealed settlement, I found a way to reach them through a mutual contact. They are very interested in revisiting the terms of their agreement in light of new criminal evidence. They can break the NDA if there's criminal activity, Margaret said. In many states, yes, NDAs cannot be used to suppress evidence of a crime. Their attorney knows this. A short pause. Margaret, this is going to be big. When it breaks, and it will break, it's going to be in the news. People are going to want to talk to you. I know, Margaret said. Are you ready for that? Margaret looked at Daniel. He was holding Noah against his chest, the baby's head tucked under his chin. Both of them completely still in the way that only happens when a person has surrendered entirely to the present moment, no past, no forward calculation, just this. Not today, she said, but when it matters, yes. Good. She could hear Renata writing something. Get some rest. There's a lot of road ahead of us. Renata. Yes. Thank you. She said it simply without elaboration, the way you thank someone when the word needs to carry its full weight without assistance. Get some sleep, Renata said and hung up. 3 months later, the Allegheny County District Attorney's Office filed criminal charges against Victor Allen Hale on 7 counts, including fraud, unauthorized access to medical records, and deliberate manipulation of medical procedures for financial gain. Christine Yo testified before the grand jury. Ryan Calder's screenshot was entered into evidence. The couple from the sealed settlement came forward publicly, their NDA nullified under the criminal evidence clause their attorney had argued for 6 weeks. Bright Path Fertility Clinic closed its doors voluntarily 2 weeks after the charges were filed, ahead of the civil suits that were coming from 4 separate families, all of whom had been connected through a private support network that Margaret had helped establish through Renata's office. She had not gone public with her own name first. She had spent those 3 months making sure the other families had legal representation, had support, had a structure around them before the wave hit. Then she went public. The interview ran on a Tuesday morning. It was not a tearful tell-all. Margaret Collins did not cry on camera. She sat across from the interviewer in a blouse she had ironed herself that morning while Daniel fed the twins, and she spoke in the steady, direct voice of a woman who had decided that every word was going to matter and none of them were going to be wasted. She said what happened. She said what had been done to their family and how long it had been known and by whom. She said that IVF patients trusted clinics with the most irreplaceable material they would ever produce, and that trust was not a courtesy, it was a covenant. And when it was broken, the consequences were not administrative. They were human. They were families sitting in hospital rooms trying to hold themselves together when they should have been doing nothing but falling in love with their children. She said the names of the other families with their permission, one by one. She said Victor Hale's name. She said Bright Path. She said all of it clearly on the record, and when the interviewer asked her how she and Daniel were doing, how their marriage had survived, how they moved through something like this, she thought about it for a moment, genuinely not performing the pause, but actually sitting inside the question. We were already built for hard things, she said finally. 6 years of infertility doesn't leave you fragile. It leaves you, I don't know, load-bearing. It makes you understand what you're actually made of and who the person next to you actually is when things are not okay. She paused. Daniel is who I already knew he was. That part was never in doubt. And your children? The interviewer asked. How do you think about telling them someday? Margaret didn't hesitate. We'll tell them the truth, she said, all of it. Because the truth in our case is not a tragedy. The truth is that their parents fought for 6 years to bring them into the world, and they arrived in the middle of something complicated, and their family held together anyway. She looked directly into the camera, not performing, not making a speech, just saying a true thing to whoever needed to hear it. Clara and Noah are not defined by what Victor Hale did in that lab. They are defined by everything that happened after, by the people who showed up for them before they even knew what showing up meant. And when they're old enough to understand that's the story I'm going to tell them first. She paused. The rest is just information, she said. They are the story. Victor Hale entered a guilty plea 11 months after the charges were filed. He was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison and permanently barred from working in any medical or research capacity. The civil settlement against Bright Path's former ownership reached a figure that Renata described with characteristic understatement as significant. Ryan Calder provided full testimony in the criminal trial and asked for nothing in return. He sent a single card to Daniel and Margaret the day after sentencing, no message inside, just his name and a phone number, and the word whenever written beneath it, which they understood to mean what it said, that he would be there if the day came and he would not push for it before. Daniel kept the card in the top drawer of his desk. He didn't know what he would do with it yet. He didn't need to know today. On the first birthday of Clara and Noah Collins, there was a party in a backyard that was too small for all the people who came. There were balloons and a cake with one candle each, and a dog that belonged to the neighbors and had not been invited but attended anyway with great enthusiasm. Margaret's mother was there, and Daniel's parents and Renata, who drank one glass of wine and held Noah for 45 minutes with a completely unguarded expression of a woman who was very good at her job and also not made of stone. Dr. Ellison sent flowers. Christine Yo, who had become something unexpected, not a friend exactly, but something in the register of a person whose courage had made another person's life possible, sent a card that arrived 2 days early and sat on the kitchen counter until the day itself. Daniel stood in the middle of all of it at one point and just looked around. Clara was pulling up on the edge of a chair and with furious determination, failing and immediately trying again. Noah was sitting in the grass examining a blade of it with the sober concentration of a person for whom the world was still full of things that required investigation. Margaret was laughing at something her mother had said, her head thrown back, completely unguarded, the way she laughed when she forgot to manage anything. He stood there and let it be exactly what it was. Not the family he had planned, not the year he had expected, not the story he would have written if someone had handed him the pen. Better, fuller, more honest about what love actually costs and what it is actually worth once you've paid the price and held the thing in your hands and understood that nothing real comes without the possibility of loss and that choosing it anyway is the only definition of brave that has ever mattered. He looked at his son in the grass. Noah looked up at exactly that moment, the specific accidental eye contact of a baby who doesn't know yet that he's being watched and doesn't need to, and his face opened into the enormous unconditional smile of a child who has looked up and found his father looking back. That smile was not in doubt. That smile was not in question. That smile was the answer to every hard thing this family had been asked to survive, and Daniel Collins received it with both hands and held it and did not let it go. Some things are not born. They are chosen every single day with the full knowledge of what the choosing costs, and that is exactly what makes them unbreakable.